Alright, we should be live. So we're back. We're going to be working on Vivi. Here he is in case you need a reminder of how he works. So if you haven't been playing Standard at all, and you haven't run into anybody else with their own build of Vivi yet, neither Brawl or Commander, so Vivi is 1 blue-red, legendary creature wizard, 0/3. Of note, because Vivi, storyline-wise, is probably a construct, would be the correct thing, or a golem. Like, one of those two would be accurate, but they decided not to give him any subtype. So, he has an activate ability for 0. You add X mana in any combination of blue and or red, where X is his power, activate only during your turn and only once each turn. And whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Vivi, and he deals 1 damage to each opponent. So that is the game text we are working with. So unlike a lot of the other commanders I've built, I actually built Vivi for Brawl because I was working on Terra at the time, and a lot of the cards that Terra needed to combo kill with, since I was building the combo version, not the value version, don't exist on Arena for Brawl. So I was just like, okay, I'll just build Vivi for the midweek Magic Brawl for the set, and he is impossibly dumb. So I was like, you know what? I would really like to have a Vivi deck for actual Commander, because he's just so obscenely strong. So, despite having already done a build for him for Brawl, I have 202 cards selected, which is actually not that bad. 60 cards that were on Arena that made it into the deck. Most of them, there are a few of them that didn't, because Brawl is a heads-up 25 starting life, and Commander is at least 2 opponents, and everybody starts at 40. So there are some things that either don't work in Commander that work very well in Brawl, or some things where it's like, yeah, you're not going to be able to sprint to the end the way you can in Brawl, so you need to be able to grind a bit more. So things that I omitted from Brawl because they were a bit slow and clunky are like, no, you probably need them for Commander. So we're going to go over all of the cards selected and what they're doing for the deck. So let's just get into it. Alright. So, basic counter spells. So there are going to be a bunch of counters in this deck. You need to be able to protect Vivi, and you need to be able to protect him in a lot of different ways. He is a lightning rod for removal, because if he gets to sit on the battlefield for any amount of time, not only is he a massive mana advantage, but he's also your primary win con. Like, he is just going to keep growing and becoming more and more threatening as the game goes on, so he kind of needs to be dealt with. And anything that takes him off of the battlefield, even temporarily, resets his counters and his power, which makes it a lot harder to win with him in, like, one big turn. So, counter spells are going to be a must. We're just going to have to figure out which ones we want to run. The more efficient the counterspell, the better. Being able to ensure Vivi hits the table and protect him from the first flurry of removal spells is going to be crucial to winning the game. So we're going to see a lot of counterspells, and we're just going to, aside from noting what makes them different or special, that's why all of them are on the list. They are primarily here to protect Vivi, not necessarily to disrupt what the opponents are doing. Although, obviously, you're going to have to do that at some point in time with them, because that's not the primary reason for putting them in. Next up is Lightning Bolt. So, Vivi is blue-red, and you do have a few options in blue in Commander to deal with problematic things. But also, Vivi is very damage-based for killing players. So, if a player gets too low, you can probably just take them out with a Lightning Bolt, so having that as an option for some of his burn spells is going to come up. But it's mostly just we need to be able to kill utility creatures, finish off problematic larger creatures, even if they're not coming at us necessarily. Like if somebody has to chump block or something to avoid taking too much damage, and we can finish off the other attacker because it's going to be a problem for us down the line. Anything like that. So Bolt is removal and direct damage. Mana Vault, this deck is insanely mana hungry. The more mana you have access to, the more likely you are to be able to just keep chaining things together. So playing Mana Vault not only gives you the 3 colorless mana, it also gives you the rebate from Vivi. There's a whole lot of cards on this list that are like, and you get the mana back if Vivi can activate this turn. There's a Kavit in there where, yes, you get the mana back during your turn. You don't get it back for opponents' turns, though, so you do have to budget your mana so that you have protection available on the opponent's turn cycle until it gets back around to you so that you can use Vivi again. But in a lot of cases, you're going to get some amount of the mana you're investing into your spells back just because Vivi gets another counter. So if you haven't used him yet, it's kind of a free roll. Like I said, it's not entirely a free roll because you do need some amount of mana on the opponent's turns to protect Vivi and to stop them from winning the game with what they're doing. But Soul Ring, same thing, but, more classic. Don't worry about Volcanic Island if you don't have it. So one of the things about Vivi, again, he's very mana intensive. Budgeting your mana each turn is actually one of the most important things for winning with him and not accidentally leaving yourself vulnerable or getting Vivi killed. So lands that come into play untapped are a much higher priority for this deck than normal. There are still some lands that come into play tapped or sometimes come into play tapped, and that's all right, but you don't want too many of them. So, whereas normally I would tell you if you're not running Volcanic Island, because you don't have it and your playgroup doesn't allow proxies, I would suggest things like Volatile Fjord or Fiery Islet. I think it's Fiery Islet, whichever one from Dominaria is the common one. In this deck, I would rather recommend ones that come into play untapped consistently. Almost all of them are on the list. So if you don't have Volcanic Island, don't worry about it too much, but it's probably just going to be a basic island or maybe one of the tap lands. Just have another red-blue source that you can fetch. But because none of those are on the list right now. Like, none of the always comes into play tapped red-blue lands are on this list because Vivi is so mana-intensive a lot of the time. You wouldn't think he would be with his ability to add tons of mana, but like I said, you need to have enough mana to get started, so that way he actually starts getting counters and can add mana, and then you need enough mana on top of that to be able to protect him. So it's kind of a thing after a while, so don't worry too much if you don't have Volcanic Island. And if your playgroup is at a slightly lower power level anyway, like nobody has cards like this, then once you have all the ones that come into play untapped, it's not, like I said, it's either another island or you throw in one of the comes into play tap lands and it's not the end of the world. If your playgroup is also lower power level, then it's not going to matter as much that one of your lands came into play tapped. But I am kind of tooling Vivi for like high-end 4. I don't play CEDH, but I might be able to get him there. I might, like, this feels like the type of deck where if I had to sit down to a CDH table, I would probably break him out just so that way I can flounder around and maybe win the game. Type of thing. Chain Lightning is same reason as Lightning Bolt. It's sorcery speed, so it's got a little less utility, but it does deal 3 damage to any target. Mana Drain, same as Counterspell, but with upside. Tabernacle at the Pendrell Vale. So this is one that has no good replacement, unless we wind up cutting the Pendrell Mists card that we'll see a little bit later. That's on here for the same reason. So Vivi has almost no creatures besides himself. And he doesn't make creature tokens or anything. Like, I don't run, the Third Path Iconoclast or Young Pyromancer or anything. I'm not here to make creature tokens and beat down. I am here to kill everybody with Vivi's spell slinging abilities. So, with that in mind, Tabernacle barely does anything to me. It makes me pay 1 for Vivi specifically. So, this thing can really crimp what creature-heavy decks can do. and there is no actual other substitute for it. But if you don't have it, and you don't have the $1,000+ that this card costs, it's not essential. It's just that because Vivi doesn't run many creatures, this is one of the more elegant solutions to how do I deal with a go wide deck without casting a blasphemous act that probably kills Vivi. It's to make all of their stuff so expensive that they can't do anything else. So that's what Tabernacle is doing here. Alright, Felwar Stone. So almost all of the mana rocks in this deck both cost very small amounts of mana and come into play untapped. I think there's like one or two that don't quite fit that, but everything else is coming in untapped and tapping for mana the turn it comes down. So with Vivi in play, same thing as before with Mana Vault and whatnot. It's a little less of a free roll, but it costs 2, it gives Vivi a counter, and it taps for 1. So you've got your mana back immediately, technically, between tapping the Felwar Stone and Vivi getting the extra counter. Alright, Stone Calendar is another thing that I've talked about a lot in these deck building videos, but I have a very specific mentality when it comes to cost reduction effects, and Stone Calendar is just barely on the list for this reason. When I look at something that says your spells cost 1 less to cast, just anything that has game text along those lines, my first question is, how many times per turn cycle is this cost reduction effect going to happen? A lot of people just jam a card into their deck that reduces the cost of some type, like some subtype of their spells. For example, the medallions. The medallions from Tempest. A lot of people, like, you're in a blue deck, so you put the blue medallion in your deck, and it's like, yes, that's not terrible, but I posit to you, it's like, if you're going to cast 1 spell per turn on average, then the difference between Sapphire Medallion and Mind Stone is actually in the negative for Sapphire Medallion. It's only giving you 1 mana, it's functionally colorless mana, and it has no other functions. And that's all you're getting per turn cycle is 1 mana off of your 1 big spell that you're casting each turn. In order to get value out of cost reductions, you have to be casting enough spells of the type that it reduces the cost on per turn cycle that you're actually getting more than 1 mana per turn. Like, for the example I just gave you, if you're casting 1 big spell per turn and you have Sapphire Medallion out to help you get to your big spells faster, it doesn't even help you if you have a big expensive artifact spell at that point. It only reduces the casting cost on blue spells specifically. So if you never cast 2 spells in a turn cycle, or almost never do that, it is actively worse than a 2 mana rock that taps for colorless and does anything else positive for you. So a lot of people will just jam the cost reduction effects into their deck because they have a bunch of cards that the cost reduction affects. And that's not terrible, but they usually don't think about it in practical terms of what they're going to get out of this card. In this case, though, Vivi is trying to cast as many spells as possible in a single turn cycle. So anything that reduces the casting cost on the bulk of the spells that he is trying to cast is going to have more dramatic of an impact. In this deck, I am trying to cast 3+ spells per turn cycle. So if I can reduce the casting cost on 3 different spells by 1, then a 2 mana artifact that reduced the casting cost on the spells effectively tapped for 3 colorless mana. And as we will see, Grim Monolith is on this list. I will spend 2 mana to get 3 colorless on an artifact that isn't as efficient as Sapphire Medallion would be. So again, it's just barely on the list in the case of Stone Calendar because the casting cost is so high on Stone Calendar that it's hard to make the rebate work as much. but Vivi is still very capable of casting it and then other spells in the same turn and taking advantage of the reduced casting cost, even on that turn if he's got any kind of counters on him already. So it's still on the list. It just might not make it to the final build, but some of these similar cards should. Sapphire Medallion and Baral are both very important in my Brawl build because of that. So I did want to consider Stone Calendar just because it's close. So in that vein, High Tide is kind of like a Dark Ritual, and because Vivi himself can provide the mana if you need him to, you don't even lose out on the blue mana from the thing if you have nothing but islands in play. The downside to this is, of course, is that not all of my lands count as islands, and we are missing 2 of the red-blue island subtype cards because we haven't gotten them yet. They have started printing the other half of that cycle of the ally color cycles from both the Amonkhet and Battle for Zendikar dual lands. And I would absolutely run the Battle for Zendikar one in this because I'm running so many basic lands anyway. So it's possible High Tide doesn't make it because it affects islands, and we do have a bunch of non-basic lands that tap for red or blue that aren't islands, so. But it was early in the cards, well, yeah, still kind of early in the card selection. It was like beginning of the middle where we hit Fallen Empires. I do the sets alphabetically, so up in the Fs. Possible High Tide does not say. So, Brainstorm. Not one that you would normally see in Commander all that much, but we're going to be running a bunch of fetch lands, and we're going to be running a bunch of tutors, so we have plenty to shuffle our deck with, and also just casting more cheap card draw spells benefits Vivi, so as something that can potentially let me look at 3 unique cards and even have access to all 3 of them, where a lot of cards, it's like you might be able to look at 3 cards and one of them's going to your hand. This one, technically, all 3 of them might wind up in your hand, and you just have to get rid of 2 other cards that you don't care about. Mystic Remora, again, I normally shy away from the popular consensus on things like Rhystic Study, but Vivi needs a critical mass of cards once his mana is going. Like, mana management is the biggest thing for Vivi, but once you have that, he just needs to keep getting cards. So, anything that gets more cards into hand for him to use is going to be something I'm interested in. So Mystic Remora and later on Rhystic Study itself are both on the list for that reason. Merchant Scroll to be able to tutor other card draw spells or counter spells as needed. Force of Will. Free counter spells are Vivi's best friend. Anything that lets me use up all of my mana on my turn and then still be able to protect Vivi is a huge deal for Vivi. So Force of Will, Force of Negation, Fierce Guardianship, all of those are making it in here. If he had other creature, like non-token creatures to sacrifice, I'm pretty sure Flare of Negation would have made it too. But that's not the world we live in. Mystical Tutor gets instants and sorceries to the top of the deck, and Vivi has so much card draw that this, and the fact that he rebates himself the blue mana. You cast this, he deals a point of damage, gets his counter, so you might not even be spending the mana technically to get that card on top before drawing it. So, again, proper mana management, and then you just need the cards. Reality Ripple is on this because it is one of the few cards that can phase Vivi out, so it's very difficult to protect Vivi from Wraths and Edicts. So there are a whole host of cards on this list that will allow Vivi to dodge all kinds of different things. Phasing him out is the best way to dodge a Wrath or Edict, so there are several cards on the list that will protect him from that. We do have the more mana-efficient ones on the list, but there's only so many. Like, we have Slip Out the Back and Reality Ripple and March of Swirling Mists. are all on here to get Vivi to phase out. So phasing out, if you don't know, just treats him as though he's not on the battlefield until he phases back in, which naturally happens at the beginning of your turn. It used to happen during the untap step, is when it would come back. Like, he would come back at the beginning of the untap step and untap normally if he was tapped. And I'm pretty sure that still holds true. I'm not 100% sure exactly how the modern wording of that is, but he does come back at the start of your turn, and he is there, and he is untapped, so regardless of exactly how it's worded, you do get him back then, so that allows him to dodge Wrath effects and to dodge Edict effects without losing his counters. And in case you're unaware of how this normally works, so Vivi has a cast trigger on him. So any spell that you cast, regardless of what the effect is going to be, is going to trigger Vivi and resolve before the spell does. So Vivi will get his counter and deal the point of damage before he phases out. So you will have that benefit, at least. Like, you're not only are you not losing the counters he already had on him, you're also not giving up the counter for casting the spell or the point of damage. So that's kind of important to note. Mind Stone, another ramping artifact. Pendril Mists. This is a 4-mana enchantment version of Tabernacle at the Pendril Vale. So if we decide to cut this and you do want the effects of Tabernacle and don't have, big pile of money just laying around, Pendril Mists is still a little expensive. It is on the reserve list, but I'm pretty sure it's, I don't think it's at $100 or above. Let me triple check that, because I genuinely don't know. Pendril. Yeah, $5. Maybe it's not on the reserve list, but it's never been reprinted, so it probably is. But yeah, sitting there at almost $6, rounded up. So yeah, if I don't run Pendril Mists in my build and you want to replace Tabernacle with Pendril Mists, that should be alright. Ancient Tomb to help ramp Vivi. Crown of Flames is a weird card that when I saw it, I'm like, do I actually want this? So one of the things that's interesting about Vivi is he's usually way more concerned with his access to blue mana than to red. Blue gives him a lot of extra card draw and time walk effects and protection abilities. Red does have some things going on that are particularly interesting with Vivi. But for the most part, he cares more about blue mana. This is something to do with the red mana, and it does a couple of different things. First of all, it's a single mana, so he rebates himself immediately. You can also spend a red mana to return this to your hand. So if you have an overabundance of red mana, or if you don't have anything else to do with Vivi himself, what you can do is activate Vivi for red mana instead, bounce this back to your hand, and recast it multiple times to get counters on him. Also, it does grant him fire breathing. So if you needed Vivi to have higher power in order to attack with him and deal damage, for example, you can pump your red mana into him and then activate him, because now he has higher power, and rebate all of that mana back while still having the higher power. And if you either want to pump him more or cast your spells, you have both options. Like, you can add nothing but red mana and effectively get 2 pumps for every red mana that you spent because of that. So I'm not sure how I feel about Crown of Flames, but it is interesting and I did want to consider it. Insight, again, I'm planning on playing this Vivi in higher tiers, so I do expect there to be at least one green ramp deck, and I do need to draw a lot of cards. Also, this will put a counter on Vivi just for casting it, so that's always good times. Lotus Petal, cost 0, gives Vivi a counter, and then you can leave the mana sitting there until you need it. I don't run Ruby Medallion in Vivi on Arena because most of my spells are blue, not red. Depending on how he shakes out for the Commander build as opposed to the Brawl build will determine whether or not I bother with Ruby Medallion. Sapphire Medallion, on the other hand, is basically locked into this deck. again, I'm trying to cast so many spells per turn cycle, and most of them are blue by default, so Sapphire Medallion definitely makes it in. Scroll Rack lets me put the bad cards back, try and find some fresh ones, and then shuffle them away. Shuffle the bad ones away. At least that's the goal. Time Warp, Vivi is very capable of chaining together lots of card draw and spells to deal damage, and then if you can get a Time Walk, he gets to do it all over again on his next turn normally, unless you finally run out of card draw. So, plus, building up Vivi on one turn and then getting a Time Walk means that you have that much more mana to work with on another turn. So, anytime Vivi can chain turns together, you're doing great. Whispers of the Muse, so at its baseline, this is 1 blue mana, draw a card, and there are going to be a few of those on the list, where the idea is that you're going to draw a card, and sometimes it's going to do other beneficial stuff, so which ones are the best ones? So this one has buyback 5, which is a lot, but if you're not doing anything else, if Vivi has a bunch of counters, but you're kind of sparse on interaction, you can use Vivi to supply most or all of the buyback mana and just cast Whispers and draw another card and try and get something going that way. And if you have enough going on and to spend your mana on, spending 1 blue mana to draw another card just to make sure what all your options are before going off, since Vivi's going to rebate you that mana anyway, is probably worthwhile. Mox Diamond. All of the Moxen that can work with Vivi are on this list, so basically all of them except for the dragon one, whatever its subclass is. I forget what. I can picture him like it's Mox. No, this isn't happening. But yeah, Diamond is on the list. Chrome, Opal, Amber, they're all on here. Seething Anger. This is another one that's kind of weird. So for red, it gives Vivi +3/+0. So effectively, for 1 red mana, it gives you 4 mana, because Vivi gets his counter, and then he gets +3 power. But for 4 mana, red with the buyback of 3, you can give Vivi a counter for future turns while still letting him add 4 mana this turn. This one's probably not going to make it. I do like the Crown a lot more from Tempest than this one from Stronghold, but it is a way to keep casting spells over and over again to give Vivi more counters for future turns without wasting his mana on the turn that you're doing it necessarily. Sift is part of a much larger group of cards where I just need to be able to draw multiple cards per card spell. So, Sift is a draw 3, discard 1. There are a few others that are similar or better on the list. So, Sift is one of the lower ones, but I still need 4 mana, draw 3 cards, basically. Like, that's the range I'm looking for. 4 mana, draw 3 cards. 3 mana, draw 2 cards can make it on there, especially if it's doing other stuff. And 1 to 2 mana to draw a card, but if it's 2 mana, it really needs to be doing something else important for the deck. So, Curiosity is just hilarious to me. So, Curiosity is, first of all, optional. So, whenever enchanted creature deals damage to an opponent, I may draw a card. If you cast a non-creature spell, Vivi deals 1 damage to each of your opponents. So, if he's enchanted with Curiosity, and you have 3 opponents, and you cast a non-creature spell once, again, Vivi resolves before the Curiosity gets onto him, so, for casting the Curiosity in the first place, so that won't trigger it. But if you follow it up with any non-creature spell, and Vivi triggers and deals damage once, and you get to draw 3 cards, it's going to feel absolutely amazing. And then it keeps going. And again, it's optional, so you don't have to worry if you're getting low on cards in deck, and you need to be able to finish off the opponents. You can still just keep flurrying your spells at them without risking decking yourself. Gamble is on the list because Vivi can have very large hands of cards, and therefore the ability to tutor for that one thing you actually need but don't have without risking discarding it is there. Gamble is one of those cards, so, like, I'm iffy on putting this one on the list because I don't have a lot of cards that benefit me from the card going to the graveyard, I do prefer gamble in decks where it's really not a gamble. It's like, okay, if I discard it, I have all of these ways to get it back, or I don't care that it's in the graveyard, it does something while it's there. Anything along those lines, and gambles and auto include. Also, if I am drawing tons of cards, I will at least consider gamble, because you will just have a full hand, and sometimes you need a very specific card to win the game. So, Frantic Search. So Frantic Search does two things in the deck. First of all, it's card draw. It's not great card draw. It's 3 mana, draw 2, discard 2. But it also untaps 3 of your lands. And even more so than normal, where that's literally a free roll, it's just, as long as you had 3 mana and the spell resolved, you still have 3 mana. And now you have 2 different cards in your hand to work with. Whereas before you had these 2, now you've drawn 2 of them, and then you get to choose the best 2 out of them and discard the other 2. So that's already really good. But the other mode that it gives Vivi is that if you had to spend a lot of mana to get to where you're at right now to draw cards and get Vivi with enough counters, you can use Vivi's mana to cast this, but then untap your lands so that you have them to protect Vivi on the opponent's turns. That same thing that I was talking about before with proper mana management. Frantic Search is a big help for that, because it's going to allow Vivi's mana to untap your lands to use on other players' turns, potentially. For Monolith for ramp. Treachery. Vivi doesn't have creatures. You know, he's got like 3 or 4, I think. It's probably more than that. I'm probably forgetting a few of them. But he does not have a ton. If he has 10 creatures, I'd be genuinely shocked and confused how I put so many creatures on this list. So Treachery allows him to not only remove one of the opponent's best threats, it also gives him an extra creature to protect him with, from everything from edicts to actually being able to attack and block without Vivi having to be at risk. So, but it also does the thing where it untaps the land, like 5 lands when you cast it. So, again, it's a way to turn Vivi's mana from him into untapped lands for you to use on other players' turns. Misdirection. It's not a free counterspell, but it is a free spell that can get Vivi out of harm's way, so it's on the list. Foil. Foil might be the worst of all of the free spells that made it onto the list. There are a few free spells that are so hard to use. Like I said, Flare of Denial doesn't really work with Vivi because he doesn't have enough creatures. But even something like Thwart, returning 3 islands to hand when Vivi has no way to play additional lands on his turn is actually really bad a lot of the time. Like, that sets him back a lot. So, I try to avoid cards like Thwart. Foil is about as bad as it can be while still being good enough. So, it makes it on the list. It is discard an island and another card instead of paying the mana cost. Fact or Fiction is 4 mana to get anywhere between your absolute best card in the top 5, which is not great, but, you know, there's a lot of things that Vivi could hit that would just be amazing, so, to getting your best, you know, getting your second through 4th best card out of the top 5 for 4 mana, which, if I'm already down for 4 mana, draw 3s, and that's a lot of the time what Fact or Fiction is going to be. It's either going to be a 4 mana draw 3 or a 4 mana draw 1 to 2, where one of those cards is your best card out of the top 5 of your deck. So, Opt is 1 mana, scry 1, draw a card. Like I said, there's a whole bunch of cards that are on this list that are just cheap cantrips that do other things. Repulse is a bit of interaction that also cantrips. So, Concentrate, 4 mana, draw 3. Peek, looks at the opponent's hand, draws a card. Reckless Charge. Reckless Charge is very similar to the one from Stronghold, except that it is flashback instead of buyback, and the flashback cost is 3, so the first time you cast it, it's 1 mana, and Vivi essentially gains 4 power. The second time, it's 3 mana, and Vivi essentially gains 4 power. So if you can go 2 red and 2, you can give Vivi plus 8 power until end of turn. 2 of it's going to stick around and deal 2 damage to each opponent. So, depending on what else you're trying to do that turn. Time stretch, if time warp is good, time stretch is better. Deep analysis is 4 mana to draw 2, but also later on 2 mana to draw and 3 life to draw another 2. I don't know if that's going to be good enough to make it, but I think it's close. Also, if I get to loot, which I have very few cards that can, loot and surveil. I have very few cards that can, but they do exist in the deck, so if I can put this into the graveyard and just make it 2 mana and 3 life to draw 2 cards, that's probably good enough. Sip of my soda here. Future Sight is to help us see more cards and get access to more spells, because that is all Vivi needs. Mind's Desire. This deck can definitely storm off, and storming off with a spell that lets me storm off even more just feels so right. Like, none of the other storm spells quite felt right in Vivi, but Mind's Desire is definitely something he's down for. There's Chrome Mox. Fabricate to tutor for any of the more powerful artifacts. Gilded Lotus. Costs 5, gives me 3, counter on Vivi, so it's 5 gets me 4 mana back, but then on subsequent turns, it's 3 extra mana, plus an extra counter on Vivi. Isochron Scepter. I don't know how many things I have that are valid targets for Isochron Scepter. Obviously, we have things like Counterspell and Mana Drain. I don't think I bothered with Dramatic Reversal. I could, and so could you if you wanted to. I'm going to turn on my fan real quick. Starting to get kind of warm back here. It's been very cool in the area lately because there's so I'm on the east coast of the United States, but I'm much further north in New Jersey, actually. So the hurricane weather, though, does come up the coast, and we have been having tons of rain and whatnot. So it has been a lot cooler out, but starting to feel a little hot and humid back here, specifically in my office, because my office always is a bit hotter than the surrounding area, so turn the fan on. Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to bother with trying to do an infinite thing with Isochron Scepter, but even still, it casts the spell, which is very important. Some things copy spells and just create the copy on the stack. Isochron Scepter is one of those, it copies the spell that's been exiled, and then you get to cast the copy, and that is a lot more common when you're copying the spell while it's not on the stack, is that you get to cast the copy. And casting the copy is very important because it triggers Vivi, whereas copying the spell on the stack without the copy being something that you're permitted to cast specifically does not trigger Vivi. Oblivion Stone, because you need a reset button. And yeah, it sucks that it might kill Vivi, but if I need to pop this thing, chances are killing Vivi is the cost to not losing the game, so. Conjurer's Bauble is a 1-drop artifact that I can trade in for a card, so it is a 1-mana draw card, and it has the added benefit of putting a card from my graveyard on the bottom of my library, so I might be able to put back in something particularly potent and then shuffle it back into the deck to try and draw it. Doubling Cube is weird, so if I already have a ton of mana from Vivi, I can make a ton more mana with Doubling Cube from Vivi. So if Vivi adds, like 5 mana. Actually, I think it needs... No, 5 mana would work. So he adds 5 mana, I spend 2 of it, I have 3. Oh wait, no. It's 2 to cast, 3 to tap. Sorry. So we need him to be adding, 7 mana at that point. Or I need to have 7 mana in my mana pool. So that way the 3 doubles it to 8 or more. But I can definitely get into positions where the Doubling Cube is going to generate huge amounts of mana, so. And again, mana and cards are the 2 choke points in Vivi's deck, so proper mana management. Serum Visions, 1 blue, draw 1, scry 2. Godalkin Shackles, similar to Treachery, just being able to steal opponents like medium-sized creatures in order to take them away from the opponent, but also to allow Vivi to have blockers and potentially other attackers. Sensei's Divining Top. Sensei's Divine Top has a couple of different things going for it in this deck that it doesn't normally. It triggers Vivi, first of all. Like, that's the big one. Also, because it triggers Vivi and because you are exchanging it for the top card of your deck, putting it on top and then casting a draw multiple card spell, or even draw a single card spell, then allows you to recast the top again. So you are still the one card deeper into your deck. Like, if you top swap for Opt, and then you cast Opt and redraw top and play top, now you're gaining access to the card that was below Opt after that. So you are still getting one card deeper into your deck by doing it that way, but Vivi's also picked up a couple of counters now and can add 2 more mana. Tenza is a huge power and toughness boost to Vivi, even if you have to cast it that turn. Like, it's 3 to cast and 1 to equip, but it gives Vivi +3/+3 and trample. So, despite its casting cost and equip cost, it actually lets you go up mana if you had the mana to spare in the first place, and also gives Vivi trample, and then continues to work on subsequent turns. So, is one of the better stat boosting equipment that Vivi can be running. Sakashima the Imposter. So it's not important to be able to make other copies of Vivi, but it is certainly incredibly potent to do so. If you have a second copy of Vivi in play, which Sakashima can accomplish, then every spell you cast is dealing 2 damage to each opponent, and both of them are getting counters individually, and that then allows you to add mana from each one of them. And also of note, and you should be careful about this, because again, proper mana management, use the one that you need to use first, but leave the other one alone until you're done casting the spells or out of mana and need to add more mana that way, so that way you don't miss out on a mana or 2. Some people are like, well, I'm going to add mana with Vivi. Let's add all of the mana so I know how much mana I have to work with. It's like, no. You're going to be able to add more mana later on if you're still casting things, so don't just go ahead and add both Vivi manas. Like, let one of them build up. And I know that sounds simple to people who are like, yeah, no, of course you do that, but some people get carried away and they just want to do all of the things, and it's like, no. If you wait, you can do even more things. Remand to stop problematic spells and to draw a card. Is it just 1M in Remand? Is that why it looks weird? Yeah, okay. Is it Signet to ramp with? Quicken 1 blue mana to draw a card, and then I can cast a sorcery at instant speed, which can be very helpful. There are a bunch of like card draw sorceries in the deck, and a few other things where if you could cast them at instant speed during another opponent's turn, and then untap with all your stuff, and Vivi has gotten more counters, you'd be a little bit better off. Quicken, as long as you're bouncing cheap things, it will rebate you the mana. Like, it rebates you 1 of the mana up front, so if you bounce a 0, it's effectively free with Vivi, and you get to draw a card. If you use it to bounce like your own 0-drop artifacts and replay them, that's more counters for Vivi, and you got to draw a card. I don't know if Repeal is going to make it into the deck, like the final build, because using it as a protective bounce spell is a lot more mana intensive. It still lets you draw a card and still a counter on Vivi, so it's still worth considering, though. Commandeer is another way to protect Vivi from certain cards. It doesn't protect him very well against Wraths unless the Wrath is to your opponents and each creature your opponents control, or something similar. You know, your Ingarrick's Wakes, your like some of the Mass Red Burn spells, where it's like deal the damage to your opponent and each creature your opponent controls, things like that. So commandeering those type of cards can protect Vivi. It also protects him from target removal by changing the target for the spell. Or, each opponent has to sacrifice a creature. That now I'm the one that controls the spell, so I'm not one of the affected players. Things like that. Rite of Flame, 1 red mana gets you 3 red mana. Well, 2 red mana and a counter on Vivi. So this was early in the process, though. A lot of spells that pump power on your creatures function as rituals with Vivi, so we might not need an actual ritual, but I did include it just in case. Ophidian Eye is a 3 mana version of Curiosity, but has Flash. Think Twice is one of the few 2 mana draw card spells, and it gets on here primarily because it's then 3 mana to draw another card, but it's spread out over time. Also of note, this is one of the primary examples of a card that makes things like Sapphire Medallion that much stronger. So it's only 1 mana to draw the card with the medallion out, and 2 mana to draw the second card. So effectively becomes a divination at that point. But then you also have the ability to spread out the payments over multiple turns if you needed to, like if you need to hold up mana for other stuff. Brute Force is a red giant growth, just straight up red +3/+3. This might actually not make it because of some of the other cards I found that will also effectively pump Vivi's power, and we'll get to them in a little bit. Should be a 0, not the letter O. Active Negation is another free counterspell. You do have to pay 5 on your next upkeep or you die, which is a bit dramatic, but if you have to spend all of your mana or most of your mana on Vivi in a turn, it's really nice to be able to protect him at the same time, even if it looks like you can't. Also of note, Vivi is very good at paying that 5 mana. Or paying his share of the 5 mana in order for you to not die, so that can also factor into it. Ponder, similar to Brainstorm, you get to see 3 cards. You do only get 1 of them this time, and if all of them are trash, you get to shuffle and draw a new one instead. But then you're stuck with that one. Savor the Moment. So, Savor the Moment is a weird time walk effect. There's only one other deck I've ever run it in. It is a 3 mana time walk, so that's very important. It makes you skip your untap step, though, which is a huge part of what makes other time walks so powerful. Skipping your untap step means that you're not getting your mana back, and you're not getting your tapped creatures back to attack with again. So it's very hard for this thing to not just be draw a card and not a whole lot else. Where it starts to break that symmetry, so the other deck that I run it in is a 5-color Super Friends, where all of the Planeswalker activated abilities get to go off again. So that's one way to break the synergy. The other one is that Vivi is still going to add his mana again. So it gives you all of Vivi's mana back. And that can be a lot better than just untapping your lands. And if you've managed to not tap your lands, if you just use Vivi's mana to cast like 1 or 2 spells and then cast Savor the Moment, and then go to the new turn where it doesn't matter that you didn't untap because you still have access to all of your other lands, and now Vivi's got a couple more counters, and you got to draw a fresh card. So yeah, Savor the Moment has a lot more power in Vivi than it would in other decks. Mindbreak Trap, obviously it's nearly impossible to use this as a free way to protect Vivi. Unless you've had to cast your own spells to protect him, and the opponents have had to respond with their own spells stopping yours, because then you might have multiple, like enough spells cast by an opponent to trigger the Mindbreak Trap's trap cost. What it's actually in here for is for other combo decks, other spell slingers, things like that, where you suddenly need to be able to stop something. So that one, that's its primary purpose on the list, if we have room for it. Everflowing Chalice. So at 2 mana, it functions like any of the other 2 mana rocks. At 0 mana, it just gives Vivi a counter and lets him make an extra mana this turn. And when you don't have anything to spend the mana on, using VV 0 and dumping all of that mana into a large chalice, so that way on subsequent turns when you do draw a card draw spell, you'll have that much more mana to work with. Starts to become a thing. Cast through time is just ridiculous if you can ever stick it. It gives all of your instants and sorceries rebound, which means on subsequent turns, if you cast the spell from your hand, you get to cast it again from exile, and then it goes to the graveyard normally. So this does mean that your counter spells will start getting exiled forever, because you can't cast them on your upkeep with no valid targets for them, and there is no way to stack triggers so that way you can cast them. There has to be something on the stack when the trigger goes on the stack, and that's just not happening. So they're just gonna wind up in the abyss, never to return. But that being said, if you get all of your card draw instants and sorceries and all of your time walk sorceries and all of that to get cast a second time, that's pretty insane. In a similar vein, Distortion Strike gives Vivi an extra 1 power for 1 mana, so you're effectively going up a mana, but it also makes him unblockable, so if he is big enough, he can just one-shot one of your opponents out of the game. And then it has Rebound, so he can try again next turn with even more power. Il Umbra is another way to protect Vivi out of nowhere, giving him +1/+1 and whatever totem armor is currently called. I forget what they changed it to. But yeah, it gives him +1/+1 and gives him a way to protect himself from being destroyed the first time. So it's that. Flame Slash is one of the more efficient burn removal spells, dealing 4 damage to a creature for only 1 red mana. Inexorable Tide is 5 mana for an enchantment that whenever you cast a spell proliferates. And I don't know if you've noticed, Vivi likes 1/1 counters, and that determines the amount of mana he has to work with. So if every spell that you're casting puts 2 counters on him instead of 1, he's having a wonderful time. Vox Opal. Twisted Image. So we'll get to the better Twisted Image later, but Twisted Image is 1 blue for an instant that swaps a creature's power and toughness until end of turn and you draw a card. So notably, Vivi is an 0/3, but the trigger will put the counter on him first, as we've already discussed. So that will make him a 1/4, which will then switch his power to 4/1, which means he now adds 4 mana until end of turn for your 1 mana. Yep. Seriously, Vivi is absolutely wonderfully overpowered. Gitaxian Probe is 2 life to look at an opponent's hand and draw a card and put a counter on Vivi. Tezzeret's Gambit is 3 mana and 2 life to draw 2 cards and put 2 counters on Vivi. In case you were confused as to how they were actually worded, that is the wording on those spells. You're allowed to pay mana if you don't have the life, but, you know, again, mana efficiency. Torpor Orb, because Vivi has almost no creatures in him, and I don't think any of the ones that are on the list have a comes into play ability. Maybe one of them does that would octuple Vivi's counters or something. I forget now, but we'll figure it out when we get to it. But Torpor Orb, if you don't have good comes into play abilities on your stuff, you should be running Torpor Orb, because most commander decks rely very heavily on creatures with good comes into play abilities. So when you're not vulnerable to it, it kind of wrecks everybody else. There we go. There's one of the comes into play abilities. Snapcaster Mage. I'm not even sure if this needs to be on the list. It's not, it didn't make it in on Brawl, because I don't need the creatures that badly, but it's on here because it flashes back one of your spells for an extra 2 mana, and then it can chump block or trade with a little creature or something. Cyclonic Rift is a reset button that does not affect Vivi. Enter the Infinite. So this is one of those weird cards that I'm not sure if it's going to make the final cut of the deck, but Vivi does have access to both this and Omniscience, which means you can in fact pull off the Omniscience Enter the Infinite combo, where you just do this and then you just keep casting spells until everybody's dead, because nobody's going to survive the combination of Enter the Infinite and Omniscience with how Vivi works. So, for a whopping 12 mana, which you're going to get by getting, like, 8 or 9 counters on Vivi, it allows you to draw your entire deck and then put one card back. So you put back whatever you want, and then until the end of your next, until your next turn, you have no maximum hand size, so you don't have to discard. But you also, again, if you have access to Omniscience, you're just going to play Omniscience and enter the Infinite, and then you're going to win, because nobody can survive that. Unless they've literally gained infinite life and have a life total in the actual millions. And you can probably still kill him. I believe Nexus of Fate is on this list also, which means you can just infinitely cycle Nexus of Fate for the rest of the game, and that will eventually wear them down if they are not stopping you already. Rapid Hybridization is one of those blue cards that can kill a creature. 1 mana, it turns it into a 3/3 frog. Curse of Swine can kill lots of creatures, leaving behind a bunch of 2/2 pigs for the opponents. Excuse me. Swan Song, 1 blue, counters an enchantment, instant, or sorcery. So it stops the enchantments that turn off Vivi's abilities, it stops instants and sorceries that would kill him, and combo pieces. And it only costs a single blue mana. Astral Cornucopia can be cast for 0, Vivi gets a counter. Can be cast for 3 mana, Vivi gets a counter, and it taps for mana, so it almost rebates you the mana. And again, you can use Vivi to cast it for, X equals 2 or something when you don't have anything better to do with the mana. And it can also be another thing to proliferate onto. Dig Through Time, 8 mana, gives you 2 cards out of the top. I think it's 7, maybe it's 6. It's been a while since I've casted Dig Through Time. You get to look at a whole bunch of cards and get the 2 best ones. And you can exile cards from your graveyard, or you can just, if you have enough mana coming off of Vivi. Disdainful Stroke counters high casting cost spells for only 2 mana. Counters those stupid wraths that are being so mean to Vivi. All the other stuff. Stubborn Denial. Stubborn Denial I like a lot because it's 1 mana, it's a 4 spike for non-creature spells to begin with. But if Vivi has 3 counters on him already, when you cast this, it becomes a negate for 1 mana. Because he will get his counter first, and then you will counter the spell because he has power 4 or greater. Treasure Cruise, blue and 7, potentially 1 blue, draw 3 cards, and then Vivi's mana on top of that if you need it. Reality Shift exiles a creature and gives them the top card of their deck as a 2/2 manifest. There's Baral to reduce the casting cost on your instants and sorceries. Disallow is one of those counter spells that makes it into almost all of my decks when I run counter spells. Being able to counter activated and triggered abilities in addition to actual spells is a very huge deal. Certain combo decks get around things by making their spells uncounterable, but if you can counter the trigger from a creature, for example, that's supposed to be winning them the game, my go-to is always Thassa's Oracle, because I have a very passionate dislike of that card in Commander, specifically. But for anything similar to that, you can stop the infinite combo that's about to go off from creature triggers by just countering the initial one and leaving them with nothing. Or at least for a turn cycle, maybe, and gives you and the rest of the table time to stop what's happening. As Foretold can get you free spells, but Amonkhet is like the 4th set I look at, or 3rd set I look at, so it might not make the final build, but it is a, oh god, what's his name? Aether Vial, but for all spells, so there's once per turn. You can cast a spell without paying its mana cost if it has CMC less than or equal to the number of counters. And again, we proliferate with a bunch of cards too, so. Crash Through is a single red mana to give my creatures trample and draw a card, and Vivi needs trample to make sure he absolutely annihilates whatever is on the other side of him. Chart of Course is 2 mana to draw 2 cards. Sometimes we'll even get to keep both those cards. Dive Down, I have multiple cards on the list that are 1 mana to give Vivi some amount of power and or toughness and hexproof until end of turn. as ways to protect him from targeted removal that are very cheap. Dive Down has the added bonus of it gives Vivi effectively 4 extra toughness to work with, so there will be times where Vivi survives not because he gained hexproof, but because he got enough toughness to grow out of range of an Anger of the Gods, or, well, Anger of the Gods you can grow with any instant, but, you know, something like Storm's Wrath or something where he still grew out of range. Or if he had enough counters on him growing out of range of a Blasphemous Act or something. Highly unlikely, but at least possible. Then we have Flood of Recollection, which is the cheapest regrowth effect in blue. Add only 2 mana to buy back an instant or sorcery, and then it exiles itself, which is fine. Sometimes you just need that one card back. The Immortal Sun reduces the casting cost of my spells, gives Vivi an extra power and toughness just by being on the battlefield, lets me draw an additional card, and shuts off problematic Planeswalker activated abilities. Most of the Planeswalkers on this list have statics that are powerful enough that I don't necessarily need their activated abilities in order to justify running them in the same deck as the Immortal Sun. So there is no like conflict there. Like Narset shutting off the opponent's card draw, Karn shutting off the opponent's artifact activated abilities, and Ugin, Eye of the Storms just exiling stuff every time I cast a colorless spell are all strong enough statics that I don't necessarily need the activated abilities for them to be good if playing the Immortal Sun would actually benefit me. Mox Amber, probably one of the best Moxes for Vivi, since it doesn't require anything else to make mana other than Vivi being in play, and it does not eat up other resources the way Mox Diamond and Chrome Mox do. So, alright, so with the other card that swap power and toughness, this is the one that is absolutely insane in Vivi. So this is Invert Invent. It's a split card, so you choose which side you're going to cast. Invert is hybrid blue-red, so it's even easier to cast, and it can switch up to 2 creatures' power and toughness until end of turn. I have done some absolutely wonderful things in Brawl with this one, including killing an opposing Vivi while giving mine access to 4 mana. I tried to counter their Vivi. They countered back so that theirs would resolve. They were out of mana. They passed the turn. I played my Vivi and played Invert Invent to swap both of our Vivi's power and toughness. Mine got the counter, so it became a 4-1. Theirs died, and then I proceeded to cast card draw spells. Good times. The other side of this thing, though, is Invent. So if Invert is already pretty decent, and the only drawback is it's not letting you draw a card like the other one was, the trade-off for that is gaining access to Invent, which is a 6 mana double tutor for up to 1 instant and up to 1 sorcery to your hand. So you can cast this and go get a free counter spell and a Time Walk, or a sorcery speed card draw spell if you want to, or, you know, do other things, because this deck has no shortage of other things that you could be doing that are absolutely insane with Vivi, so, you know, good times. Light Up the Stage is one of the few red cards that's so efficient at what it does that even though it exiles the spells and gives me until a set time limit to cast them, I'm still willing to run it despite all of the reactionary cards that are in the deck. Mostly because that spectacle cost of a red is very easy to achieve when Vivi's dealing points of damage to everybody. Precognitive Perception is 5 mana to draw 3, which is a little bit iffy, but it also has the addendum where if I cast it during my main phase, I get to scry 3 first. So looking at 3 cards, and then if none of them are good enough, getting to draw the next 3 after putting those away, or, you know, putting like 1 or 2 away and getting those 2 plus the next card in the list, is potent enough that I was willing to consider it. Similarly, Bonds of Insight. 4 mana, everybody mills 4, and then I regrow up to 2 instants and or sorceries, like any combination of 2 instants and sorceries from my graveyard to my hand, and exile this card. So, as long as I have put enough stuff in the graveyard so that it can't miss, You know, as long as it's getting back a couple of decent spells, I can always hope for better. It is 4 mana, and it does not do anything if I haven't gotten, like, the good spells into the graveyard yet, though. Unless I get lucky, so I'm a little hesitant with that one, and I do need 140 some odd cuts from this deck, so. Contentious Plan is one of the other 2 mana draw a single card spells, and that's because it proliferates. So it's 2 mana, but Vivi gets a counter, then gets a counter, and I get to draw a card, so the mana gets rebated, and anything else that I have that cares about counters is getting extra counters, so we're all good. Finale of Promise. 2 red and X. I can cast up to 1 instant and or sorcery, each with converted mana cost X or less, from my graveyard for free, and if X happens to be 10 or more, I copy those spells twice. So, alright, Ral is also on the list, and Ral hurts a little bit to not have access to his abilities, but like his static is a little less impressive. We'll get them in a second. So, Finale of Promise. If you ever cast it for 12 mana, and you get to cast, you know, a Time Walk effect 3 times and an instant 3 times, I'm pretty sure you're good. I think you did it. Karn shuts off opponents' activated abilities of their artifacts. That's his entire reason for being in here. Again, I expect to be playing against high power level decks, so shutting off their artifact ramp is definitely a thing I'm down for. Narset to shut off extra card draw and to find me spells to trigger Vivi. Ral has a -2 that copies spells, and he has effectively Magecraft because he cares about casting or copying to get his trigger. His trigger is to deal 1 point of damage to target creature or planeswalker when you cast a spell, so he can allow Vivi to get a few extra points in, but more importantly, he can copy some of the more potent spells that Vivi's casting for no additional mana if he's been in play, or for 4 mana if he wasn't. Embercleave. Embercleave allows Vivi to end the game in Heads Up. In multiplayer, it allows him to end a specific player. So, as my brother pointed out, it's nice that Vivi doesn't need Steiner around anymore. He can just do it himself. He can cast his fire magic on the sword, and then the sword can go through everything. Yeah, giving Vivi +2/+2, double strike and trample, because he's getting his counter for casting this thing in the middle of combat. It's kind of overwhelming. Of note, Mystic Sanctuary, so Vivi's just very spell heavy and very island heavy, so the extra value of Mystic Sanctuary, even with a bunch of the dual lands not counting as islands, is a bit too potent to pass up on. Underworld Breach. So you may have noticed that we did not have cards like Past in Flames on the list. And Underworld Breach is one of the more efficient Past in Flames cards. Also of note, Underworld Breach does not exile the cards that you cast. This is like one of the big things about Underworld Breach and how it got banned out of the formats that it's no longer allowed in, is that you don't exile the cards that you flash back with it, because that's not how escape works. You're supposed to be able to keep escaping with them. So, and it costs 3 additional cards to cast the spell, plus its casting cost. Excuse me, sorry, been talking way too long. So, if you can get more cards into the graveyard, you can just keep casting spells. So Vivi potentially, not only does he get the counter from Underworld Breach, he's going to get counters from the other things that you're casting from the graveyard. So you can eat large swaths of the graveyard in order to have Underworld Breach let you flash back a spell like 2 or even 3 times before you're, spent for the turn. And get a bunch of counters on Vivi and get some card advantage. So, yeah, very, very potent. Lord Dracus. So I wound up not including any of the other mutate creatures, so this one's probably just going to go. It is worth knowing, though, that, again, Vivi is not human, so you can, in fact, mutate onto him. So That would allow you to just regrow an instant or sorcery. Unfortunately, Lord Drakus does count as a creature spell when mutating. This isn't like some weird thing where he's not a creature spell on the stack and would trigger Vivi, so. Sad, but can't really be helped. Confounding Conundrum is an enchantment for 2 that draws me a card and then punishes opponents for playing extra lands. Again, I'm planning on playing against other decks of high caliber, so cutting into their ramp powers certainly helpful. Seagate Restoration is a land because it can be played as an untapped land for 3 life. So if I really desperately need it to not come into play tapped, it will oblige me. And for 7 mana, it draws me X+1 cards based on the number of cards that are in my hand. So it gives me the card to replace itself, and then it gives me a bunch more cards ideally, and then I have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. Alrund's Epiphany is a time walk that you can shave a mana off of by foretelling earlier in the game, and makes you a couple of 1/1s to help you beat down or to protect you. Burgi, God of Storytelling. Everything I said about Storm up above with Mind's Desire holds true for Burgi as well. So every time I cast a spell while Burgi's out, I add a red mana, and that mana doesn't empty until end of turn. And it's a red mana, not a blue mana, but that's okay. I'm pretty sure I can do something with it. So every single mana counts. Saw It Coming is a counterspell that I can foretell, which gets it down to a 1 in a blue, which is one of the most efficient counterspells that doesn't have any restrictions on it you can imagine. And worst case scenario, it's a cancel. So Archmage Emeritus, one of the few creatures on the list, draws me a card every time I cast basically anything in my deck. That's not true. He only cares about instants and sorceries, but he also draws me a card when I copy them, so. Expressive Iteration lets me see the top 3 and gives me access to 2 of them. What's the worst one on the bottom? Solve the Equation. Tutors for... yeah, we'll go back to the other one. Solve the Equation. Tutors for any instant or sorcery. It is 3 mana, but the right instant or sorcery can still be worth it, and Vivi does offset that casting cost, so... So, getting back to Prismari command. So, 3 mana, choose 2. Deal 2 damage to any target. Player draws 2 and discards 2. Player makes a treasure token and destroy an artifact. All very good options. And Vivi's going to get a counter. So if I get a counter and make a treasure, then that's 2 out of the 3 mana back. The Hand of Vecna. So this one, Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, is literally the first set I look at because alphabetically. So it does have the option to pay X life to equip Vivi, and then at the beginning of combat, he will get +X based on the number of cards in my hand. So it is very possible for me to play this and have it give Vivi such a huge bonus that it will pay for itself and some other things in the same turn. Like, if I play this and pay 4 life, I'm already technically up a mana. Because that's 1 counter on Vivi and +4/+4. So technically I'm up 2 mana at that point. So yeah, it's not hard to go up on mana with this thing and to give Vivi a permanent power and toughness boost that you can use turn after turn. The downside, of course, is if I cast non-creature spells that don't draw me cards, I'm losing out on some of the mana on subsequent turns, but again, proper mana management is one of the more important things, so. Consider 1 blue, surveil 1, draw a card. Memory Deluge. Memory Deluge is weird because I do run cost reduction effects, which does actually negatively impact Memory Deluge, since the amount of cards you get to look at is based on the casting cost of Memory Deluge, but as long as it costs me the 2 blue, then I'm at least getting the top 2 cards of my deck. So 2 mana, draw 2, effectively, is already alright, and if I have to spend more mana on it but get to look at more cards, that's also fine. But this is worth noting. You want to be careful with this one because anything that lets you cast it for free means that you don't get to see any cards and therefore don't get to put any of the cards in your hand. Ancestral Anger is 1 red mana, gives Vivi +X+O, which is going to be 1 because there won't be any other copies of it. And I draw a card. He also gains Trample until turn. So 1 mana, give Vivi +2+O and Trample. +2/+1 because he's getting a counter. You know what I mean. We've seen enough of this already, and it's a cantrip, so it's a cantripping ritual in Vivi. Is kind of what I'm all about, honestly. Hullbreaker Horror. I'm storming off anyway. I might as well be able to effectively put my opponent's boards back in their hand if I need to. Honest, like, they get to keep their lands, but all their other stuff is going away. Having exactly none of that. Invoke Calamity. So, for 5 mana and triple red, I get to cast up to 2 instants and/or sorceries from my hand and/or graveyard with total mana value 6 or less without paying their casting costs, and then exile them. So, again, getting to cast both of the spells, especially if I'm flashing back spells that I've already used to get more counters on Vivi and to get their effects again. Jin-Gitaxias is a little more potent in Brawl, where he effectively is Soriyamo, the one from Kamigawa that's banned in Commander because when it flips, opponent's first spell each turn is countered. So yeah, Jin-Gitaxias, he only works on the first artifact, instant or sorcery, but that's good enough. And also he copies that spell for me, and I certainly have a lot of artifacts and instants and sorceries that are worth copying. Of Swirling Mists, another way to protect Vivi from basically anything. Also of note, as long as I have the blue mana and a card in my hand, I don't even need other mana to cast this. So I can still protect Vivi by exiling a blue card from my hand. Offer You Can't Refuse. Very cheap counterspell. Gets rid of everything that's not a creature to keep Vivi safe. And the 2 treasures is a drawback, but it's a little bit less in Commander than it would be in Brawl. Like, I don't use an Offer You Can't Refuse in Brawl, because giving them access to more mana might mean they can cast another removal spell in the same turn, and I have better options at 1 mana in a heads-up scenario, where the mana's a lot tighter than I do in a multiplayer Commander game, where players are going to have a lot more mana to work with. Like a card like Concerted Defenses that counters unless they pay 1/+1 for each creature in my party, which Vivi's a wizard, so sometimes it's a 1 mana leak, or not mana leak, but any of the counter unless they pay 2 mana leak variants, and the rest of the time it's a 4 spike, so that one I feel is a bit better in Brawl, whereas an Offer You Can't Refuse is a lot more potent in Commander. Arcane Bombardment, I don't know if this one is worth it, but if I can stick it, it's a free spell. Like, a free spell next turn, and then 2 free spells after that, and so on. Most of the time, obviously, if I exile an instant or counterspell, rather, it's going to be a bit of an issue. Big Score is one of the most mana-efficient versions of this thing. It is 4 mana, but only 1 of it's red, at instant speed, to draw 2, discard 1 to draw 2, and make 2 treasures. So, it's a counter on Vivi and 2 treasures, so it mostly pays for itself, and I get to see a few more cards. Slip Out the Back is the other, and probably most mana-efficient way to phase Vivi out, so Shore Up is Yield, Hexproof, and +1/+1 to protect Vivi. Vesuvian Duplimancy is one of the more insane things. So, as you've noticed just with Shore Up and Slip Out the Back, but there are plenty of others, I have a lot of ways to protect Vivi that target Vivi. And only Vivi. So, if Vesuvian Duplimancy makes another Vivi while protecting the first one from targeted removal, it's going to snowball very quickly from that point forward. Vivi gets very out of hand when there's more than one of him. That being said, I think I have a few cards on the list that can only make one extra copy of Vivi, and they're way less impressive. The fact that this one can come down ahead of Vivi, and then when I play him and have protection up for him, not only are they not going to be able to kill him, but I'll also be able to make another one. And it also allows me to get around edict effects too by just making another Vivi at that point, so that way I have two and I can lose the token. Um, Drafna. So Drafna's kind of interesting. He has two activated abilities. One of them is a repeatable way to bounce an artifact for 2 mana, which picking up an artifact and putting it back down multiple times for Vivi to get counters is already fine, and if the artifact actually has a comes into play ability that's doing anything beneficial for me, bonus. And also, he can use 3 mana and tap himself to copy an artifact spell I control. So, get an extra copy of that Gilded Lotus or Mana Vault or whatever I'm using at the time. One with the multiverse is a more expensive future sight that's also a weaker omniscience. So, I'm down. I'm down for that. Experimental Augury is 2 mana to let me look at the top 3, put 1 into my hand, and the rest on the bottom, and then proliferate. So again, a 2 mana draw card that proliferates, but it's instant speed, and it gives me the best card out of the top 3, so in almost every case, it's better than Contentious Plan, which is already good enough. Vivisurgeon's Insight is 5 mana to draw 3 cards and proliferate, so that's 2 counters on Vivi, which does offset a little bit the fact that it's a 5 mana spell instead of a 4 mana spell. Orabrask, the Saga Orabrask. So similar to Burgi, when I cast an instant or sorcery, I get a red mana, and if I cast enough instants and sorceries in the same turn, I can pay 1 red mana and flip him. And then he becomes the Great Work. And the Great Work's Chapter 1 deals 3 damage to an opponent and each creature they control. Chapter 2 gives me 3 treasures. And Chapter 3 gives me the ability to cast spells from my graveyard as though they had flashback. Which, as you can imagine, gets very out of hand for Vivi. But the fact that I'm just getting extra mana when I cast my spells is almost good enough in and of itself. Like, he's a weaker Burgi. So, alright, so when I was talking before about how rituals and even pump effects can function as rituals with Vivi, and I found some other ones that are better, let's look at Zalfrin Shapecraft for a second. So, 1 in a blue for an instant. The creature becomes base power and toughness 4/3, and I draw a card. So, casting this makes Vivi a 5 power creature. Immediately. Like, 0/3 Vivi becomes a 5/3, but also, because it's base power and toughness, all of his counters that he got still count towards what his power is. So you're not losing anything by doing this. You are effectively giving Vivi +4/+0 by casting this and drawing a card. So, huge power boost, ritual effect, and a free card draw off of it. Flames of Anor. So this is 3 mana, and you choose 1 or 2 if you have a wizard. You get to draw 2 cards, destroy an artifact, or deal 5 damage to a creature. Getting to draw 2 cards and do one of the other things is incredibly potent with Vivi, who is a wizard, so you will almost always get to choose 2. So, yeah. Yeah, drawing 2 cards and doing that. Sometimes you will do the other 2. You'll kill an artifact and a problematic creature. But for the most part, you're going to draw 2 cards and do one of the other things. And both of the other things are pretty useful, and getting to draw 2 cards is exactly what Vivi's looking for. The One Ring. The One Ring, I don't know if it's actually supposed to be on this list or not. But what I was saying before about how Brawl games can end a lot faster than Commander games, is definitely one of the reasons why the One Ring is on the list. You're more likely to be able to draw more than 3 cards over the course of the game that you're going to win with the One Ring in Commander than you are in Brawl. If I play this in Brawl and get to draw the 1 card and then the 2 cards next turn, I'm probably already going to win. Also, the One Ring is nerfed in Brawl, so that's another reason why I'm not currently running it. Because I have a lot better options for the 4 mana, or they're effectively 6 mana, draw 3 cards. But Commander does tend to get dragged out a lot more than Brawl does, so having a repeatable mass card draw spell is probably a bit more important. Monstrous Rage gives Vivi effectively +4 power, and one of that power sticks around from the buff effect, in addition to the 1 power sticking around from the counter, and gives him trample. So good times for Vivi. The 2 Oyers. So let's talk about Axonal first. Axonal is the red one. So if my source, my red source specifically, deals non-combat damage, and that damage is less than Axonal's power, the damage becomes Axonal's power, which is 4. So Vivi goes from deal 1 damage to each opponent to dealing 4 damage to each opponent. If Axonal dies, he returns to the battlefield transformed and tapped as a land that taps for red, and you can transform him back for 3 mana and tapping him if you've dealt 4 or more points of non-combat damage this turn at sorcery speed for activating Axonal. So if you have 2 opponents and you cast 2 spells and you still have the 3 mana left over plus tapping the land, then you can flip Axonal back over pretty easily. Like, Vivi is already designed to be able to do this, so the fact that Axonal might make him that much more efficient and also be able to have a very real chance to flip Axonal back over consistently makes Axonal interesting to consider. Of note, you may have noticed that there aren't any other damage multipliers or additive damage effects. And the reason for that is Axonal made it onto the list partially because of that, because I'm not bothering with the other ones. A lot of the time, I just want Vivi to deal his damage, and I'm more concerned about finding more card draw to keep Vivi dealing damage than I am about increasing the amount of damage each individual spell does. But Axonal's a bit too powerful for the mana investment for that. So the thing that's very important to know, though, and newer players especially, every time I explain this rule for the first time to somebody, it kind of melts their brain that it works this way. But it actually does. So, if there, so replacement effects. This is the replacement effects rant. Because most replacement effects make more sense when the thing being affected by them, or when the player being affected by them, or the controller of the thing being affected by them gets to choose the order the replacement effects are applied in. The fact that it works this way in this particular scenario catches people off guard, because everybody thinks it works the way they want it to, and it does not. So, again, the player being affected, or the controller of the permanent being affected by a replacement effect, chooses the order in which they apply. So, if I have out Oyer Axonal, who wants to change the amount of damage from 1 to 4, and I have out Emancipation of Fire, which triples the damage that my sources would deal. What most people think would happen is that now Vivi deals 12 damage. And that's not how that works. Not even close. In fact, it's way more disappointing than that. What actually happens is the opponent that's being affected by the 2 different effects gets to choose. So Vivi is trying to deal 1, and there's a replacement effect that says if the amount of damage being dealt is less than 4, it becomes 4, and another one that says whatever the amount of damage is being dealt, triple it. And they're both replacement effects. If this source would deal damage, do X. So, the affected player gets to choose the order in which they're applied. So what they do is, first they choose Emancipation of Fire. So the 1 damage becomes 3 damage. And then, because it's still less than Axonal's power, he still applies and makes it 4. That's how that works. That is how magic works. And for every other situation where multiple replacement effects are trying to apply to the same event, regardless of who controls them, the affected player or the owner of the affected permanent gets to choose how those replacement effects apply. And in most cases, you want it to work that way, but with the damage one, you always want to be the one that's doing it, and you don't. And so, a lot of times players don't know this rule, and they will apply the damage. They will tell their opponent they're taking 12 damage, and the opponent also doesn't know the rule and takes the 12 damage. So, like I said, whenever I explain this to people who have never heard this one before, it's a brain melting moment, because why does my opponent get to decide how all of my effects stack? Because it's not normally only your effects, and it's because of how replacement effects work. So that is the rule, and that is the reason for the rule, but it is insanely counterintuitive in this exact situation, which is, I think, the most common replacement effects situation that comes up, where it's your effects and the other player being affected. And that's why it breaks most people's brains that it works that way, because they're used to the positive replacement effects that they control being something that they get to decide, like, if you would draw a card, draw 2 cards instead, and if you would draw a card, do something else instead, and so they get to stack the ones the way they want, so that way they get the 2 cards, and then each of the 2 cards gets the benefit of the other replacement effect. And, it's like, it feels good, but that's because it's your effect and it's affecting you, so you get to decide the order of the replacement effects. It also is weird because of damage prevention. So in the case of, like, Axonal, it's like, if a red source would deal damage to you, prevent 1 of that damage, and if a red source would deal less than 4 points of damage, deal the 4 points of damage. So the opponent, what they can do is they can prevent the 1 damage that they were taking, and then now they're not being dealt any damage, so red source isn't dealing damage to them anymore, so Axonal doesn't count. The other option is, let's say they were being dealt, like, 2 damage, and Axonal's trying to double it to 4, and they prevent 1 of it. What they actually do is they let Axonal put it back up to 4, and then prevent the 1 damage and take 3. Because otherwise they're preventing 1 of the 2 damage, and then the other damage gets buffed up back to 4. Magic. But yeah, this rule, I always explain this rule when it comes up in one of my deck building things, because most people don't know how it works outside of, like, tournament players who have tried to do this before and need to know how it works. And even some of them don't know until they get called, and then the judge comes over and has to explain to them that, no, that's not actually how magic works. And boy howdy, when there's prizes on the line and people are already pretty tense, do they feel like they're getting robbed at that point by having the rules explained to them how the rules actually work. This is one of those ones that people just don't, it doesn't make sense if you don't know why the rule is the rule. So I always feel I need to explain it whenever it comes up, so that way more and more people understand it. It is one of my favorite niche rulings to explain to people, because magic rules are incredibly complicated, and this is one that does not come up that often, and most people, when it comes up naturally and they have never read that particular rule or encountered it before, misinterpret how it's supposed to work. So that is one of the reasons why you don't see, like, mechanized warfare or fiery emancipation or anything else but I do have Axonal. It's because Axonal is particularly potent with Vivi and does not work at all with the other ones the way you want it to. Alright, now for Pakpatik. So, Pakpatik gives the instance that you cast from your hand Rebound. It's only the instance, but that's okay, because we still have a bunch of instant speed card draw, and instant speed other positive effects, like things that protect Vivi, where if they just rebounded and Vivi got some extra counters and some extra power until end of turn, that'd be neat. Also, when it dies, it comes back as a land with 3 time counters on it. Tapping it for mana removes a time counter. Once all the time counters are gone, you can flip it back over for 3 mana and tapping it. Relic's Roar, similar to but slightly worse than Zalfrin Shapecraft. It only costs a single blue mana. It makes the creature a 4/3 artifact dinosaur until end of turn, because it can affect your artifacts also, basically animating them into 4/3s. And it does not draw you a card because it's only a single blue mana. The card directly below that, Embers of Karlov Manor, is nearly identical, except that it's not a dinosaur, it just becomes a 4/3 artifact creature until end of turn. And you have the option to collect Evidence 6. If you do, it makes the creature a 1/1. So you can use that as a negative on opponent's creatures by making them 1/1s until end of turn, if that will help kill them in scenarios where they wouldn't otherwise die. But for the most part, it's in here to be 1 mana, Vivi gets +5 power until end of turn, and then you get to cast a whole bunch of other spells. Proph's Eidetic Memory, 2 mana, enchantment, ETBs, I draw 1. Beginning of combat on my turn, I get to put +1/+1 counters on a creature equal to the number of cards I've drawn this turn -1. So the 1 card that you get guaranteed per turn does not count, all of your other card draw does. Thundering Falls is one of the few tap lands that I run. I don't think I mentioned this when we went past where Temple of Epiphany should have been, but the one that scries and the one that surveils are both on the list as tap lands that do other things, because you need to find the right spells or the right lands depending on where you are in the game state for Vivi. So them coming to play tapped is a little less negatively impactful and is offset by their comes into play abilities. Plan the Heist is a 4 mana spell that can draw 3 cards. If you're empty-handed, you also get to surveil 3 first, and you can also plot it for 4 mana if for some reason you don't want to cast it right this second and you want to cast it on a future turn. Artist Talent is one of the classes, so level 1 is when you cast a non-creature spell, you can rummage, discard a card from your hand to draw a card. Level 2 makes all of your non-creature spells cost 1 less, and level 3 is if a source would deal non-combat damage to a permanent or player, it deals +2 damage instead. I did kind of forget I had this one because Bloomburrow is also one of the... Let's see there. Is also one of the alphabetically first ones, so... But yeah, so... I don't run this in Brawl because, again, Brawl is a bit faster. Chapter 1 gives you some card selection. Level 1 gives you some card selection. Level 2 is a much cheaper, for the most part, Stone Calendar. Like, it still requires 5 mana overall, but you get to split it up among 2 turns, so... And Chapter 3, Level 3, whatever, does increase Vivi's damage output. So all 3 things are working towards what you're trying to accomplish. This is, again, one that I don't run in Brawl because I think it's a bit too slow and clunky. But in a Commander game, you have a bit more time, and this isn't one of those things, for the most part, that's going to super scare your opponents compared to other things you and other players might be doing. So this one might get to sit on the battlefield for a little bit and get a little bit of advantage before somebody decides, yeah, maybe that's enough from that one. Stock Up is 5 mana to get the best 2 out of the top 5 cards of your deck. The fact that you look at 5 puts it like leagues ahead of drawing 3 for 3 mana, because you're going to get the best 2 out of the top 5. So, and the rest of them go to the bottom for later. So, yeah, if I can look at that many extra cards and get the 2 best ones, I'm a lot more inclined to do that. Very similar to, the look at the top 3, put 1 into your hand, and the rest go away and proliferate is just better, even if it weren't also an instant on top of that, over the proliferate draw a card for 2 mana. I would much rather have card selection whenever possible. Well, that's a bad example because, you're getting 1 card either way. But you know what I mean. If you're getting 2 cards versus 1 card, but you get to look at 3, the looking at 3 can be a lot better. So looking at 5 to get 2 when you're still only paying the 3 mana for it is pretty strong. Meringue River Regent is in here for its Omen spell, which is an instant speed sift. So it's just innately better than Sift because it's an instant. The only downside is that you cannot actually tutor for Meringue River Regent with any of the things that tutor for instants and sorceries. So you cannot actually tutor Coil and Catch. Past that, though, it is a 4 mana draw 3, discard 1 that then shuffles itself back into your deck to be drawn again. Mistrized Village is I probably glossed over Cavern of Souls. I usually don't go over the land, but a lot of the lands are a bit more important this time. Mistrized Village makes it so that your next spell can't be countered by paying blue and tapping it. Very good for forcing Vivi into play. Very good for forcing your big card draw spell or Time Walk effect through before trying to do other stuff in the turn. Or after having done other stuff in the turn, and now you want to, take your extra turn or whatever. So, very helpful that way. Also comes into play untapped if you control a mountain, so it almost never comes into play tapped either. Ugin, Eye of Storm. So when you cast him and when you cast a colorless spell while he's in play, you can exile a permanent that's 1 or more colors. So you can't hit lands, you can't hit colorless things. He's going to chew through a lot of the opponent's resources very quickly. He also pluses to draw cards and make mana. To draw cards and gain life. Or you can zero him to make mana if you desperately need more mana. And if you ever hit his ultimate, especially if you hit his ultimate with at least 1 loyalty remaining afterwards, then you get to do the dumbest thing possible, which is pull all of your colorless spells out of your deck and cast them for free, giving Vivi a ton of counters, dealing a ton of damage, and exiling most of your opponent's board states. Unending Whisper is 1 blue for a sorcery to draw a card, and you can harmonize it for 6 mana. So it's a better initial price than Think Twice for the card draw, and a worse cost than Think Twice for the flashback. But if you don't have anything else going on, Vivi can tap for that. Vivi with 3 to 5 counters on him is not unreasonable, and so just being able to pay a single blue to draw a card and tap your big guy is just fine and dandy. Astrologian's Planisphere is a very watered down Vivi. Just straight up. It is a 2 mana 1/1 that gets 1/1 counters when you cast non-creature spells. But you can also spend 2 mana to slide that equipment over to Vivi so that he gets 2 counters every time you cast a spell, and that's a wonderful thing. Dreams of Laguna is sitting very comfortably in between Think Twice and Unending Whisper, so it's 2 mana initially, so same casting cost as Think Twice, but you get a Surveil first. And then for an extra mana on top of the flashback cost from Think Twice, you get that Surveil again. So if I'm going to run the one, I'm definitely running the other, and I'm probably running Dreams of Laguna over Think Twice just because the initial payment is the same and you're getting just that little bit extra. Linlum Industrial Regency. Has the ability to spend 3 mana to cast it as an adventure to make one of the 0/1 black mage tokens, which just helps Vivi kill opponents faster, and then it's a land, so it can count as a land in the land slot in place of a mountain. There's Vivi. He kind of needs to be in the deck. Personal Tutor. Okay, so this is how silly this deck is. There are so many powerful sorceries in it that Personal Tutor actually starts to look good. Not only are there enough powerful sorceries in it to merit a card that can only tutor a sorcery to the top of your deck, there's also so much card draw in the deck that you should be able to pick up that card for free basically after tutoring for it somewhere above 50% of the time. Sleight of Hand is 1 mana to look at 2 cards, put 1 into your hand. Temporal Manipulation for extra turns. Capture Jing Shao for extra turns. Preordain. 1 blue mana, scry 2, draw 1. Good times. Chandra Firebrand is worse. Ral Storm's Conduit. She also has the ability to -2 to copy the next instant or sorcery that you cast. Her other modes are fine, but not essential. Similar to Ral, she is primarily in here to copy spells, and she can do other stuff while she's doing that. Swiftfoot Boots as a way to protect Vivi. You'll notice that Greaves is not on the list, because if you put Greaves on Vivi, you cannot use any of the targeted phasing out effects to protect him from, wraths and whatnot. So you need to be able to target Vivi, and your opponents need to not be able to target Vivi, and you need to be able to save Vivi from things that don't target him. Visions of Beyond is 1 blue to draw a card, but if a graveyard has 20 or more cards in it, you draw 3. This one's probably not making the final cut, but it is a 1 mana draw card with potentially more upside, so I wanted to at least consider it. There's Omniscience. Spell Twine is 6 mana. You exile an instant or sorcery from your graveyard and 1 from an opponent's graveyard, and then you get to cast both of those. So 6 mana, 3 different spells cast. Your best dead instant or sorcery, the best dead instant or sorcery among all of the opponent's graveyards, 3 counters on Vivi, good times. Wildfire Elemental. So 2 red and 2, Elemental 3/3. When my source deals non-combat damage to an opponent, my creatures get +1/+0 until end of turn. Very, very similar to Burgi in its function. Every time I cast a non-creature spell, Vivi gets an extra power. And every time Vivi gets an extra power, that's an extra mana that turn. So, yeah. Burgi is incredibly powerful, so we have 2 bad Burgis on the list just because. I do have Fire Emancipation. Alright, fine. I have it. I'm sorry. I did forget that I put it on the list. It's still Fire. This is because it was core 21. That's how it's listed alphabetically. So M21 I would have looked at way before I got to the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. I emphasize the because that's where it is alphabetically, is in the T's. So yes, I do have Fire Emancipation on the list. It is a non-bow with Ogier Axonal. They might not both make it in because of that. I completely forgot I put Fire Emancipation on the list. It is still triple damage for Vivi. It is still potent. It might still make the list. I thought I had cut all of these or ignored them, but apparently I did not, so. Joke's on me. Maybe I should. I just counted the list. I did not read every single card because I wanted to actually read every single card now. So, that's on me. And I've been working on this for over a month now, and also I was in the hospital. So, in between, not anything serious. I have kidney stones, and I had a particularly bad one. Anybody who watches just for these wouldn't know that, unless you actually keep up on the Twitch VODs on Twitch, because I don't upload the VODs for the card selection process anymore, because I did go over it there, but yeah, I had a particularly bad kidney stone, and they decided to keep me for observation because my kidney functions were very poor because of that. So I was in the hospital for roughly 2 days. That was last week, by the way. Like, it hasn't not even been a full week since I've been out of the hospital. So I might have forgotten a few things from earlier in the month, and I apologize. Unleash Fury. So I'm going to go out on a limb because we haven't encountered many and we're getting near the end. This is one of the very few, if only, target creature doubles its power and toughness, or doubles its power until end of turn. So, very, very strong if Vivi has a ton of counters. Not so much if he doesn't. But Vivi only really needs like 2 counters on him, because then he'll go to 3, and then that'll be 6. And 6 mana from an investment of like 2 mana is perfectly fine. So it might make it. Arcane Epiphany starts at 5, but because I will almost always control a wizard, it actually costs 4, and it draws me 3, making it an instant speed concentration in almost every way, shape, and form. Archmage of the Runes makes my spells cheaper and draws me cards when I cast them. Since in sorcery specifically, but that's good enough. Expropriate. Another card I normally avoid that has a very high power level. Do I not have Rhystic Study? I don't remember seeing Rhystic Study. I could have sworn I had put it on the list. I don't remember talking about it. Hang on. Like, that just hit me because I was like, and I think I had, like, when we were talking about Mystic Remora, I said, I have Rhystic Study somewhere on the list, and I don't remember talking about it. Or Prophecy. Oh yeah, no, I just literally skipped right over it. Okay. Sorry, Rhystic Study. My bad. Okay. So, anyway, other cards that are emotionally damaging and absolutely ridiculous. Expropriate. So, Vivi is capable of producing huge amounts of mana, and he's going to be in like tier 4. So Expropriate feels very appropriate. This way over the top, unnecessary Time Walk plus steal all your stuff is just way, way too good if you can cast it. So, Archmage's Charm. We do favor blue. It's 3 mana to draw 2 cards, or 3 mana to counter a spell, or 3 mana to grab a 1 or less non-land permanent from somebody. All 3 modes are decent. I don't know if it's going to make it. Triple blue is a little bit brutal to be able to cast as a counter spell, specifically, just because Vivi can't provide the rest of the mana for it. Or some negations in, Talisman of Creativity's in, Demonic Prodigy. Didn't make it into Vivi Brawl. Again, I don't think I need it, and the extra creature is kind of unnecessary. But in Commander, doubling up on Vivi's triggers is at least worth considering. Ragavan, if you ever hit turn 1 Ragavan, the game's going to be over a lot of the time. Ragavan building up treasures and letting you cast Vivi with tons of mana to protect him and or cast other spells. Just way too strong. Also, later in the game, if Ragavan's getting through, he can actually let you cast more spells. So, just in case you weren't casting enough. Strike It Rich is 1 mana to get a mana back in the form of a treasure and give Vivi a counter. And later on, you can cast it to deal another point of damage and get a rebate on the treasure with Vivi, so. Amphibian Downpour is one of those cards I run in Brawl because you always need to be able to stop your one opponent's commander, just about. Like, almost everybody has a commander that really needs to be interacted with because it's a major part of their game plan. And sometimes it also turns their other guys into frogs, too. Less potent in Commander, but still sometimes you need to stop whatever is happening to you, and turning it into a froggy frog is a way better use of your time. And you have more opponents to hopefully cast more spells to help set up everything being turned into frogs except for Vivi. So. Commander's Plate. 4 mana, but gives Vivi +3/+3, protection from white, black, and green. and a counter, so effectively +4/+4, so it gets you your mana back. Jessica's Will, another card that a lot of players swear by that I almost never use, but adding red for each card in one of your opponent's hands probably gives you most of your mana back, and exiling your top 3 and being able to cast them. Again, I'm not thrilled about being able to cast spells until end of turn or the end of the next turn, but that is a lot of cards, and it's probably free, and it's putting counters on Vivi, so it's really hard to argue with. Mnemonic Deluge. 9 mana sorcery. Exile an instant or sorcery from a graveyard and cast it 3 times. That is 4 counters on Vivi, and possibly anywhere between 3 and 6 extra turns. Or other stuff, because why not? Sakashima of the Thousand Faces is similar to Sakashima the Imposter, gives you an extra copy of Vivi, and lets you do more silly Vivi things. Gale of Waterdeep, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you can flashback a sorcery or instant respectively from your graveyard. Vile Duplication probably won't wind up making it. 1 copy of Vivi, and it has to target him. Is not as effective as things like Duplication or even the Sakashimas. Champion's Helm gives Vivi Hexproof and +2/+2, so spending 4 mana total gives Vivi a counter, +2/+2, and Hexproof. And that's assuming that it's not already in play, ready to suit up Vivi and give him, spend 1 mana, give him +2/+2, so that way he adds more mana that turn and is protected. Arcane Signet, another mana rock. Mizzix's Mastery. So this is probably one of the most potent ones in the deck, in my Brawl deck, and I have to imagine it's still going to do God's work against multiple opponents in Commander if it resolves. So, you exile an instant or sorcery from your graveyard, and you copy it, and then you can cast the copy. Or you can overload it for 5 and 3 red, 8 mana total, at which point in time you get to cast literally every dead instant and sorcery you have. It feels amazing. I even usually cast most of my counters targeting like my worst spell or stacking them in such a way that the one counter spell tries to counter the spell, but then another counter spell counters the first counter. So that way all of the spells get cast. Yeah, unlike some of the other ones, you put each copy onto the stack individually, so there can be other spells on the stack already when you're casting the counter spells in order to get around the whole having no targets. So, as long as you stack them all appropriately, you're going to cast every single spell, and that's just absolutely nuts. 1 second. Okay, I'm back. I'll try and remember to edit that out, but if I didn't, sorry for the minute of silence. Alright, so that was Mizzix's Mastery. Conqueror's Flail. Gives you +1/+1 for each color he is, because he will be in play and he will be red and blue at the same time. So, cost 2, equips for 2, gives him +2/+2. That's a rebate back on the mana for the most part, but he's off by a mana then. But opponents can't cast spells on my turn while he's equipped. So that just makes it a lot easier to do all of the dumb things with Vivi. Fierce Guardianship and Deflecting Swat are free to play if Vivi's in play, and that means you can protect him for no mana. Ripples of Potential is 2 mana to proliferate, and then I can phase out any number of permanents that I added counters with this effect. So Vivi will get a counter. If Vivi has no counters, again, he's going to get one just for casting this. So you can actually use this to protect a Vivi with no counters on him, unless something has also robbed him of his abilities on top of that. Aetheric Amplifier. At one have any color. Oh, right. Double the number of counters on a permanent that I have at sorcery speed. I was like, which one is this one again? But yeah, it's going to double up Vivi's counters, so good times to be had by all. Also, it can double up the number of counters on one of the planeswalkers if I really needed to. And Wrecking Ball Arm from Final Fantasy, 2 to cast, 2 to equip for Vivi, so 4 mana total spent, gives him base power and toughness 7/7. That does cut off the ritual potential of things like the Zalfrin Shapecraft and whatnot, but I'm pretty sure if Vivi is currently an 8/8, I don't necessarily need those, and I can cast them on other targets to give Vivi a counter and draw the card off of Shapecraft, for example. Doctor Who, we have Quantum Misalignment, which is a 5 mana sorcery with Rebound that can make a non-legendary token copy of one of my creatures, so while this one is the same as duplication for that, in that it has to target Vivi, the fact that it will do it again on the next turn and will trigger the 2 Vivis makes me inclined. Traverse Eternity is 4 mana for a sorcery. I draw X cards based on the highest converted mana cost of my historic permanents. So for 4 mana, it's a draw 3, because Vivi is 3. So, and if they kill Vivi, I probably still draw 1 or 2 for my artifacts in play. Radstorm. Blue and 3, instant storm proliferate. Good times for Vivi. I believe that is every single card on the list. Okay, so we're at a 2-hour video. I have been talking for 2 straight hours. I'm getting hoarse. Next time, we will start eliminating cards from the list. We already went over a few that can go. So thank you for watching, and I will see you then. Have a good rest of your day.